Hello, everyone. Welcome to MedTech Digital Week, brought to you by the producers of the face-to-face MedTech Summit, visiting Brussels in June 2019. My name is Lauren Berry, and I'll be your host for today's session titled, Taking Advantage of the New EU MDR PMS Requirements. First, I'll cover some quick housekeeping items. If you experience difficulties with audio or advancing slides, refresh your screen with F5. If you are experiencing other issues, hit the question mark button to receive assistance. At any time during the presentation, submit your questions into the Q&A window on the left-hand side of your screen. In 24 hours, you'll receive a link to watch the recording of this session. You can also download the presentation slides in the resource list box on the right-hand side of your screen. Now let's begin by introducing our speakers. Oliver Kreis, Executive Vice President at ProSystem, an NSF international company. And Birkin Guler, Senior Consultant, Regulatory Affairs and Project Management at ProSystem, an NSF international company. Thank you for joining us today, Oliver and Birkin. Now I'll hand it over to you both to begin the presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to this meeting here. I want to invite you to talking about the advantages of the new EU MDR for post-market surveillance and above. My name is Oliver Kreis. I'm the CEO of ProSystem GmbH in Hamburg. Today there is a great event going on. We celebrate the opening of our 20th floor, where we will conduct in the future seminars on MDR and other topics, as well as helping our clients and the public to conduct technical files to be compliant for MDR and IVDR. Let us get started and jump into the scope discussion of the new regulation. The MDR is a legal document of over 175 pages, and it subsequently follows the current rules of a directive, the Medical Device Directive, and the Directive of Active Implantable Medical Devices. So when we look into the chapter of definitions in the new MDR, we will see that key terms like medical device or accessories has been slightly modified. So the definitions are different than in existing regulations. The scope of the MDR is much broader than only for medical devices. It contains medical devices and their accessories. It contains applicable rules for investigational devices, which are devices which are not CE marked yet, but ready to go into a clinical trial. It also contains requirements for systems and for procedure packs, which means more than one medical device is used in conjunction at the same time with one and the same patient. Politically, when the MDR has been set up, there were a political interest also to include products, special products with no or with a non-medical purpose. They are included in Annex 16, and this list can be modified by upcoming delegated acts on the political interest of the EU Commission. If necessary, the EU Commission has the right to introduce common specifications how these products shall be checked for compliance and to meet the requirements of the MDR. So when you start reading the legal text of the MDR, every time when the law is talking about a medical device per se, then only the left upper blue box is addressed. When you will find the term device only, then we have the assignment of all in-scope products listed by the MDR. So there is a slight difference article by article when the MDR is talking about investigational devices. Investigational devices in itself are not considered to be fully applicable medical devices. And if the law wants to address all the 4 blue boxes, then the law is using the term device. And if the MDR wants to address a specific requirement for medical devices only, then the law is using the phrase medical device. Now, I would like to give you a high-level overview of the big 5 requirements addressed by the new regulation. So the main new message is clinical matters. So there is approximately 20 articles, definitions, and annexes in the new regulation dealing with requirements on clinical evaluation and clinical investigation. These requirements, particularly on the side of clinical investigations, are new to this level of detail in a European regulation. When you go further, already known requirements on usability and on risk management get very detailed addressed and linked to each other. Today, we have already existing established requirements on benefit risk analysis, on MedDev documents for the conduction of clinical evaluation reports, or existing international or European standards which link these requirements. The MDR in the future is combining these 3 elements, clinical, usability, and risk management, to a very tight triangle. If you start R&D work for a new medical device, the new regulation requires from you that you have no false claims about your product, and based on your claims, you have to define an input statement for your design work and particularly use that intended use or intended purpose statement as an input for your risk management activities and usability activities. The expectation from the MDR, how an intended purpose statement is phrased, is much more detailed than we have this requirement in the existing medical device directive. If we go as a side remark into the landscape of in vitro diagnostica medical devices, there is even the level of detail for defining an intended purpose statement very, very precise based on an existing checklist. If we put now these very 3 connected requirements on clinical, usability, and risk management, and put our diagram into a 3rd dimension, we have space to talk about requirements above it and requirements below it, and not in a subsequential order, but in a generic meaning. We find requirements on labeling, approximately over 60 requirements in the new MDR, which are connected and referenced to each other. Examples are a summary of safety and clinical performance, information for safety and warnings, the instruction for use, UDI codes, any labels on the packaging or the product itself, user training, and this goes on and on. All these requirements in the MDR and also in the IVDR regulation is what a manufacturer is communicating to the public. This is the mechanism, labeling is a mechanism where a manufacturer informs the patient, the user, and the public about the medical device, and he has the venue to communicate warnings and safety concerns. Let's put this labeling on a visual basis now on the downside of this diagram and have space available on the top. And this space on the top is filled with requirements on post-market surveillance. Let me shorten this in the term feedback. It means all the information we can gain and collect from the market fed back to the manufacturer of the medical device. And in this context, we also have a majority of requirements we will hear more about by my subsequent speaker, Mr. Güler, who will introduce you in more detail what are the PMS requirements of the new medical device regulation.
Thank you, Oliver, and welcome all to this webinar on the new post-market surveillance requirements. My name is Birkin Güler. I am a senior consultant with ProSystem and NSF International Company. So to the question, why post-market surveillance? There are many good reasons to have a robust PMS system in place. Firstly, implementing a PMS system is now mandatory with the introduction of the MDR. So there is no other way but to implement the new requirements if you want to remain compliant with the European regulatory framework. More than 30 PMS-related requirements have been introduced. Approximately 22 of them can be found in Article 10, but mainly in Articles 83 through 86. About 11 further requirements, which we'll see in the following slides, are in the new Annex 3 regarding the technical documentation on post-market surveillance. Secondly, no matter how accurately you perform verification and validation tests at the design stage, there is no way to accurately simulate every possible real-life situation. That is why systematic monitoring of the product performance in real-life situations after market introduction is necessary in order to ensure that the identified device risks, risk control measures, and residual risks remain acceptable, but also to ensure the ongoing validity of the benefit risk determination, the state of the art, and other considerations. So Article 83 asks each manufacturer to plan, to establish, document, implement, maintain, and update a PMS system for each device. It needs to be an integral part of the quality management system as referred to in Article 10, Section 9, and must contribute to the quality, safety, and performance of the device. When setting up the system, make it fit to your product's risk classes. The effort for low-risk devices does not have to be as high as for high-risk devices. What is new with the MDR is the emphasis on actively gathering or creating post-market data. So what does active PMS mean? Active means that you should not wait for information to come to your doorstep as it is usual with the vigilance activities. Be active, go collect available data on the market, or plan appropriate methods to generate missing data. To do this, there need to be processes and plans to ensure collection of good quality data and to ensure that you are always able to draw up the appropriate conclusions and necessary actions. So, with Article 83, some entirely new requirements for PMS are being introduced when compared to the MDD, and no guidance so far has covered PMS in this level of detail. The green highlights indicate requirements that can be found in recent standards or guidance documents. Yellow highlights indicate new requirements. The ISO 14971-2012, for example, requires manufacturers to use post-production experience to improve the risk management. Also, as already mentioned, post-production experience should be used to update the design and other information. One of the most crucial interfaces that is new is the requirement to update the clinical evaluation with post-market experience data, as expressed by my colleague Oliver. So the typical clinical life cycle would be to create a clinical evaluation plan according to the new MDR Annex 14 Part A, and to create a clinical evaluation according to Article 61 and MDR Annex 14 Part A. If there is a lack of literature or clinical experience with similar products, this may indicate the need for a clinical investigation. This mainly applies to innovative devices, obviously. If a known technology, further PMCF methods, such as post-market studies, either prospective or retrospective, may be in order. Next, depending on that, you would create or update a PMS and PMCF plan based on the lacks of literature or data that you have identified. You would perform the planned methods and draw conclusions. One of these conclusions may be to update the clinical evaluation report. If, for example, the state-of-the-art, the indications, the target population, benefit or risk require adjusting. Ultimately, you will have to evaluate the effectiveness of the plans and update them if required. So, PMS data shall also be used to update the new summary of safety and clinical performance, or the SSCP, which the MDR introduces in Article 32, and which is required for Class 3 devices and implant devices only. So the SSCP is not mandatory with the date of application in May 2020. The SSCP is required when applying for MDR certification. The SSCP requirements, such as the intended purpose, indications, target populations, therapeutic or diagnostic alternatives, which are listed in Article 32, suggest that most of the data may be extracted from the clinical evaluation report. But focus your resources on much more critical topics of the MDR implementation, such as generating or collecting post-market data and clinical data to prove favorable benefit-risk ratios. Creating the SSCP does not need to be priority number 1 on your MDR implementation agenda, at least not if you do not plan to apply for an MDR certification as soon as the first MDR designated notified bodies become available. Using data to improve the safety and performance of other devices should also be new for most manufacturers, but with the MDD as a reference, this requirement is considered to be new. Not a new requirement is trend reporting, which is mentioned in MedDev 212-1. However, there are many uncertainties regarding the interpretation and implementation of this requirement stated in Article 88. We all know that serious incidents need to be reported immediately to the regulatory authorities, but what about those incidents that do not have to be reported but still need to be evaluated with regards to the risk-benefit ratio? Article 88 bindingly introduces the requirement to evaluate those non-serious incidents or incidents that are expected undesirable side effects that could have a significant impact on the benefit-risk analysis. So the PMS plan needs to specify how these kinds of incidents are to be managed. The PMS plan also needs descriptions of the methodologies to determine any statistically significant increase in the frequency or severity of such incidents, and obviously the observation period. If there are trend reporting procedures in place that meet the detailed requirements of the MDR, it may be sufficient to reference them in the plan. So in conclusion, the key messages would be that one of the major issues will be to tackle the currently available procedures to contribute to the PMS and PMCF, to identify the missing interfaces, and to make sure that these interfaces share the required data inputs and outputs. So as mentioned before, Article 84 asks manufacturers to put up a PMS plan and to make it a part of the technical documentation. When creating the plan, remember that the PMS activities shall be proportionate to the risk class of the device and appropriate for the type of device. Details regarding the planning of the PMS activities can be found in the new Annex 3. The PMS plan needs to specify active and systematic procedures to gather various number of information, such as information concerning serious incidents, including information on from other PSURs and field safety corrective actions. Ideally, you would reference to your existing vigilance procedures, which should be streamlined with the MDR vigilance requirements in Articles 87 to 92. Furthermore, Annex 3 provides detailed requirements regarding the specification of data gathering, as well as analysis and evaluation methods, such as suitable indicators and threshold values. Determining appropriate indicators and threshold values should be based on your current post-market experience with the device. That is, of course, if your devices have already been placed on the market under the MDD and you have experience data. If you do not have any market experience with your device, you should use the market experience data of similar devices, which may, for example, come from competent authorities' reporting databases. And after the completion of the PMS period, if you find that these estimates have been too high or too low, you will obviously have to update the plan as required by Article 83. This principle applies to all parts, not only of the PMS plan, but also of the PMCF plan that is required in Annex 14. Since the PMS activities should be appropriate to the risk class and device type, so do the PMS reports for Class 1 devices demand less effort when compared to the periodic safety update report, which we will talk about in detail in a minute. The PMS report for Class 1 devices merely needs summaries of the results and conclusions of the PMS activities, as well as rationales and descriptions in case any corrective or preventive actions were performed. There is no periodic updating required for the PMS report. In fact, the manufacturer needs to determine situations when the PMS report requires update. Much more effort and additional resources will be required to assemble the Periodic Safety Update Report, or PSUR, which, depending on the risk class, needs to be updated at least every 2 years, up to annually, or when necessary. But it's not just the high frequency of required updates that makes this requirement so demanding. Besides the content that is required for the Class 1 PMS report, the PSUR further must contain the conclusion on the benefit risk determination, along with sales and marketing data, but more importantly, it has to contain the main findings of the PMCF activities. This is where people get confused about the difference between PMS and PMCF. The definitions of the MDR say that PMS means any activities to proactively collect and review experience in general. This also includes, for example, the use experience to contribute to the usability engineering, whereas post-market clinical follow-up, or PMCF, is a subset of post-market surveillance, specifically focusing on clinical data. This is illustrated on the left-hand graphic. So PMCF is one of the most important proactive PMS activities. On the right-hand side, you see that the PSUR is a result of your PMS activities for every device class except for Class 1 devices. As mentioned in Article 86, the PSUR will also require information coming from your PMCF report. This report is an additional document that on a regular basis sums up your PMCF activities and serves as an update to your clinical evaluation report. For Class 3 devices and implantable devices, this PMCF report has to be created annually. So there's even more work heading your way. There's certainly potential to save some work here. Once the pre-market clinical evaluation report has been created, the future PMCF reports serve as so-called delta documents. These delta documents reference and amend only the relevant sections of the clinical evaluation report with the new PMCF data, such as new publications. Therefore, you should adjust your clinical evaluation procedure as soon as possible to reflect this concept and to spare you from a lot of extra work. When talking about the design phases of a medical device, creating the PMS and PMCF plans makes most sense at the end of the design period, once a possible lack of clinical data has been identified, or critical residual risks after completing risk management activities remain, and which require further monitoring. So the plans for risk management, clinical evaluation, PMS and PMCF are part of the technical documentation, and you can see the interdependencies between the plans and the reports, which contribute eventually to the benefit risk determination. At the design stage, the risk management and clinical plans are the main driving forces for creating the required objective evidences of the technical documentation. The risk management has a major impact on many aspects of the product design, such as the content of accompanying documents, on the usability engineering, as Oliver mentioned, or on the extent of the verification and validation activities performed during this design stage. The clinical evaluation activities, on the other hand, focus on proving that the device resembles the current state of the art and that the identified benefits outweigh the residual risks, hopefully resulting in a favorable benefit-risk ratio. As soon as the device is placed on the market, this power shifts. PMS, including PMCF, become the main driving forces. The gathered data and the analysis results provide valuable feedback to the interfaces, which are stated in Article 83, Section 3. And among these interfaces, as mentioned, the risk management file and subsequently the product design, the clinical evaluation are the most crucial parts of the technical documentation that are going to require frequent updates triggered by the PMS and PMCF system. This is why you should make sure that the PMS teams comprise of experts that are familiar with these interfaces. So what is the payoff out of this additional regulatory burden? Well, obviously making sure to meet regulatory requirements, but more importantly, post-market surveillance is one of the activities that can signal a change in medical device performance or a potential safety issue with the medical device after market release. Post-market surveillance can also identify the organization's defined lifetime of the medical device has changed, or that the medical device is not current state of the art due to competing medical devices, the evolution to the state of the art, or alternative medical treatment procedures. These signals can trigger a design modification, a change in intended use or purpose, a new medical device design, or even the removal of medical devices from the market. So as we are approaching to the end of my part, and before I hand lead back over to Oliver for some concluding words, allow me to highlight why implementing the new PMS and PMCF requirements need to be of the highest priority in your MDR implementation planning. When setting up or updating your PMS system, remember to include your economic operators as defined by Article 2 and Article 83. I like to call them the watchdogs, since according to Articles 11 to 14, they are now obliged to report any feedback they receive directly to you. And by experience, identifying the economic operators that have an impact on your regulatory compliance, as well as setting up new agreements with them, takes time. Therefore, don't wait too long to bring your PMS system in shape, because Article 120, Section 3 says that the MDR requirements relating to post-market surveillance and vigilance will apply to any medical device from the date of application in May 2020. However, according to the German Health Ministry, the Summary of Safety and Clinical Performance, or SSCP, is no direct output of PMS and thus does not need to be part of the MDD-compliant technical documentation. The SSCP needs to be created when applying for MDR certification. And if you are a Class 3 or implant device manufacturer, there is a slight chance for you to dodge the bullet of having to perform clinical investigations. Article 61.6 says that an investigation is not required if your device has been lawfully placed on the market or put into service in accordance with the MDD or AIMDD, and for which the clinical evaluation is based on sufficient clinical data. Well, but which level of clinical data is considered to be sufficient? According to the National Work Group for the Implementation of the MDR in Germany, the NACI, it is up to each manufacturer to individually define what a sufficient level of clinical data is. Therefore, check your clinical data situation. Ask yourself, were the clinical investigations or PMCF studies conducted according to good clinical and scientific practice? Notified bodies are more and more challenging manufacturers' clinical evidence. The data accepted under the current MDD may no longer be acceptable under the MDR. Some devices that have been on the market for years or even decades may see their clinical investigations dismissed as inadequate because they are not compliant with the current version of the Helsinki Declaration or the ISO 14155, or do not meet higher demands for medical scientific relevance. This is why PMCF studies could help bridge the gap, and this is why you should have started gathering clinical data yesterday. So in conclusion, for the first time, detailed PMS requirements are being provided, and these requirements are now legally binding. In many articles and the annexes 3 and 14, the MDR emphasizes the importance of actively conducting PMS. Post-market clinical follow-up activities are now mandatory, and there are no exemptions. And when reviewing and updating your technical documentation, identify the procedures and the inputs as well as outputs that require interfaces with your PMS and PMCF systems. Try to determine estimates for the specific action items that you have translated from the MDR gap assessment activities. That being said, my colleague Oliver Kreis will now take the lead again and walk you through some challenges when implementing the MDR.
Thank you very much, Berkin. And let me round up this webinar with some very fundamental questions we get asked by almost all our clients. What shall I do to budget adequately for MDR implementation? We get this question in slightly different flavors, but the question comes over and over again. So we give you our prediction and our best estimates, and we want to share with you how we have conducted these estimates. So if we perform a clinical evaluation report, realistically, the work to do that is 20 days of work. ProSystem has conducted over the last 3 years more than 450 clinical evaluation reports for our clients, and the 20 days is a statistic average number of these works. If you have to do an update of an existing Med Device 271 revision 4 report, it could be definitely less days of work. So the majority of the files we can inspect and review today have a problem with the part on the clinical evaluation side. So in many cases, the truth is, if you want to upgrade a medical device from MDD to MDR the first time, you have to budget 15 to 20 days just to do this work. If we read the requirements in Annex 1 on the MDR, the new General Safety and Performance Requirements, you can find out that the concept of a failure mode and effect analysis would not be sufficient to meet MDR requirements. The text and the requirements on the risk management systems are clearly defined top-down. Terminology like hazard or hazardous situation is clearly phrased in the letter of the law. And if a medical device has as a backup in an existing risk management file only FMEA documents, this would not be compliant with MDR. Therefore, you have to budget time to reorganize this documentation, make it top-down instead of bottom-up, and to calculate 2 weeks of work is, we think, conservative. In reality, if you have to introduce new risk control measures, it's even more work which has to be performed. The usability piece is a stepchild of the family. In the last 10 years, many manufacturers have no very adequate usability files. There is no grandfathering ruling in the MDR, so we start from scratch. A new complete usability engineering file needs to be in the MDR technical documentation. Here, our estimates are only the gap. If somebody would completely comply with MDD today, what is the delta to go to MDR? But if you have less than that, the work is even more intensive. If you look on the labeling side, the question is what to do with UDI. The UDI activity in itself is an own project. It will occupy a lot of resources. But the biggest requirement, and it's not addressed to one article, is an internal consistency check. If you have information on a packaging, on a label, if you have any information on a type plate on a medical device or in an instruction for use, the address of economic operators has to be identical. You could not fool the market with false claims. So the devil is in the detail, and labeling means you have to introduce new processes that all kinds of information you share with the public are consistent and valid. The post-market activities I have put here in green color to indicate this is not a one-time effort to upgrade to MDR. This is an effort we will see on an annual basis. The one-time effort will be to create appropriate processes and implement those in your post-market surveillance system as part of your quality management system. But this estimate here is the continuous workload on an annually basis. Of course, if you modify content in an existing technical file to make that whole document readable and consistent, you have to do some editorial updates to keep it as a searchable one file in which you can navigate. If we summarize that, it is on the conservative side to say between 40 and 75 days of work is a realistic expectation, what we have to do pre-market to be compliant with MDR. And we don't forget, we have annual additional workloads per technical file. Now, if we look in the methodology, what we did behind this, we went through the MDR regulation, identified areas of workload to define new processes, and that symbol of a delta means it's 20 days of work. If I do this and perform it in a big corporation, the delta symbol means it's maybe 1 week of work if I do it in a startup company. And the difference is, in a big corporation, the level of decision making are in a hierarchy. Every topic needs to be discussed in different committees and meetings. And the communication effort to come to a consensus is much more intensive than if you have a very small company who is looking for compliance. Our conclusion is that we need approximately 30 work months to get all the processes in place, including post-market surveillance processes. If we look into the annexes, we can make a similar estimate for the amount of work when it comes to do remediation work on technical files. So our best guessing, as introduced in the second previous slide, is 2.5 work months. It's a good planning number. And if we conclude this, we can create a formula and say the total effort to be compliant with MDR is something around 30 deltas. Please interpret this as 30 months of work, plus the multiplication of a factor 2.5 to each technical file you have to maintain and upgrade. Please don't underestimate the total workload for this. So in an example, if a company has to maintain and upgrade 50 tech files, this is a workload of almost 13 man-year of work. This needs to be planned because the time is clicking. If we want to summarize this and conclude, we have to install parallel work streams to get everything right. The most time-consuming work stream for MDR implementation is to make sure that for all products, we have valid clinical evaluation reports. If those are not sufficient to kick off clinical trials, called clinical investigations under MDR, and run those and gain and collect adequate clinical data. That's the most time-consuming activity. Therefore, on this diagram, this has been spelled out as a separate work stream. To build up a quality management system according to the new MDR regulation, ISO 13485-2016 is a perfect start, but in the level of details, you have to influence approximately 25 different processes and add up requirements from the MDR regulation. If we look into the area of technical files and design dossiers, this is the most heaviest work on the long term. We put it here in green. We recommend to kick off some pilots to figure out how the proper documentation on labeling information and other details can be organized. And after your quality system has been adopted to 13485-2016 plus MDR requirements, and you have clearly defined SOPs, what is the content of a technical documentation, then you should run on a quarterly basis to upgrade existing tech files from MDD to MDR. All this work will not be possible if upper management is not making some distinguished decisions at the beginning. Who are economic operators of your organization? If your company is registered outside Europe, you need an EU representative. The new role on the economic operators is you need also an importer. And these legal entities needs to be established and defined. Otherwise, in your instruction for use or on your labeling on the packaging, you cannot document the correct and proper addresses. There is a heavy debate going on at EU level whether this target deadline of May 2020 as an end of a transition period is useful. We hear more and more voices that this is impossible to do for all market participants. And realistically, we need maybe an extension of this transition period. The first notified bodies will be published, presumably by end of March, early April 2019. Then we have almost 1 year left for the rest of the existing transition period. But this means approximately 50% of the market participants will get access to notified body services. The big question here is, what is doing the rest? We will find here very controversial ongoing discussions, and we invite you very kindly to raise your questions now at the end of this webinar. Let me summarize. If we go from MDD to MDR, this can be done in steps, in very logical steps, and not in one big activity. Let me conclude with the mission statement of NSF International, which is the owner of ProSystem GmbH in Hamburg. The mission and the goal is to protect and improve human health. Thank you very much for your attention, and please open now.
Thank you, Oliver and Birkin, for an excellent presentation. We've received a few questions already, but we'll give the rest of you a moment to enter your questions in the Q&A box to the left of the slides. Before we begin the Q&A, I'll run through some brief announcements. First, I'd like to thank ProSystem and NSF International Company for sponsoring the event. Next, I'd like to quickly draw your attention to our face-to-face MedTech Summit, visiting Brussels in June of next year. Also, be sure to check out the resources list to the right of your screen where you can download the presentation slides from this session. Now, let's go back to Oliver and Birkin to begin the begin the Q&A. We do have a lot of questions here today, so let's jump right in. Can you please tell me the activities that PMCF integrates beyond a PMCF study?
Sure. I mean, well, everybody's afraid when hearing that PMCF is required that they will in the future have to conduct studies over studies, but that's not the point. Really, any activity that kind of delivers clinical data or data that answers your lack in clinical evidence is appropriate. You are, as the expert, as the manufacturer, the ones to select the appropriate methods to gather clinical data and to justify those methods and the frequencies. So, like literature review of clinical publications, which is the most common PMCF activity, if you want to update your clinical evaluation report or create it in the first place. But also interviews and surveys can be means to collect clinical data. So, yeah, there's a variety to that.
Great. Thank you very much. You also mentioned literature reviews as PMCF activity. Will it still be considered a PMCF if you do not find articles to your particular device but similar devices?
Well, I think this applies to the obstacles that there are regarding equivalent devices. And I do see that the issue with publications that do not specifically focus or mention manufacturers and the devices specifically, unless those publications have been created by the manufacturer. So that would be a combination of methods appropriate, like doing the literature review, and if there are still gaps, you could conduct surveys to fill those gaps. So a combination of multiple methods could be appropriate here, but yeah, you would have to look at that in a case-by-case scenario. So.
Great, thank you. Another question we have here is what are the requirements of PMCF for Class 1 devices? Is a proactive approach expected here as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the PMCF is, as per definition in the MDR, a continuous procedure to update the clinical evaluation report. So you will eventually have to update the clinical evaluation report for Class 1 devices. This is less frequent than for Class 3 devices, obviously, but still proactive approaches are required. And as I just mentioned, I mean, literature reviews, which you already do for the activity, are appropriate. Plus, every now and then a survey or interview could be sufficient. I'm not the expert on the specific device. I don't know which device this really is, and I'm not the notified body, because the notified body eventually is the organ to decide.
Great, thank you. Another question: what is considered sufficient clinical evidence for procedure packs, per pack as a whole, or by DM of the pack?
Well, procedure packs are a special kind of, I mean, the question here really would be, is this a legal person, natural person, that is really just combining two CE mark devices? Because in that case, you would just have to stick to Article 22.2, I guess, which asks you to draw up a statement saying that you have, considered the compatibility of the combined devices, and that you are supplying the information that is required. But if you are combining medical devices with devices that are not CE marked, this makes you the manufacturer of this procedure pack, and in that case, you would obviously have to draw up the clinical evaluation report. And well, I think the best method to do that would be to really look at the medical device as a whole, and really consider the individual devices on an indication level. So to combine the individual devices in one CER and to focus on the indication. This is based on what the question is, really what I can answer so far. If there's more detail required, we can get in touch after this session.
That would be great. Thank you. Another question: how do I get market feedback on procedure pack, since it has a lot of different devices?
Right. Again, the statement, I mean, with the statement, you obviously provide your contact details as the legal or natural person that combines the devices, but also the information of the, actual original manufacturer. So there are ways that you will get your market feedback. If you are a supplier of procedure packs, there would have to be contractual agreements with the manufacturer. So yeah.
All right, that's great. Let's see, next question we have here. Is the literature search for the PMCF the same as the one conducted for PMS?
Well, PMCF itself says that the focus lies on clinical data, clinical evidence. So not really. You may find literature publications that include both, like arguments on state of the art as well as on clinical data, but literature, really a literature review for PMCF would be pretty much the same as for the CER, right? So you would have to put up a search protocol which is reproducible, which has all the information so that you can reproduce the literature search for the CER and PMCF activities. For when it comes to PMS literature review, or generally when it comes to publicly available information, you are, to my knowledge, not required to specify in detail to have a search protocol in place to do the search for technical literature or something like that.
Great, thank you. And I think this will be the last question as we are running out of time. The PMCF refers specifically to clinical data. What kind of PMCF activities beyond the PMCF studies can we do to implement proactive activities like feedback from users, literature, suitable registers, clinical data relating to similar devices? Is this correct?
This is a variety of the activities that you can conduct, absolutely. And as I said before, you are really the ones who are to justify the methods that are appropriate, that have the insight to the risk management and your clinical evaluation to really assess where the lack of clinical evidence and other data is to prove that your device is safe and performant. So yeah, you're really the ones to justify that, but that sums up the most common methods, definitely, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for questions today. Once again, thank you, Oliver and Birkin, for a great session.
Thank you.
If anyone submitted a question that wasn't addressed, and there were definitely a few, please do keep in mind that our speakers will reach out to you directly. This session was recorded. You'll receive a notification in 24 hours when the on-demand session is available for viewing. Before you log off, please take a moment to complete the feedback form so we can continue to improve your Digital Week experience. On behalf of Connect 365 Life Sciences and ProSystem and NSF International Company, have a great day.